Okay. I get it. I watched the wrong video. I should have watched the gameplay as well and not just the announcement trailer. I'm sorry. Hey, what's up guys? My name is Cherno. Welcome to another reaction/review video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Ratchet Clank Rift Apart again. But this time I'm going to be looking at the gameplay because that's what I failed to obviously look at last time, and I'm sorry for that. I also want to mention quickly that when I looked at the announcement trailer, which I'll have links up there, a few people did correct me and point out that Clank is in fact ray traced, and of course I had no idea that the developers said that and that was the case because that was all the footage that I saw, and I guess I just didn't look closely enough on the frame to actually see all of the reflections. So thank you to all of those for correcting me and pointing that out. I will be definitely paying attention to the fact that he is ray traced here. I mean, I would honestly expect him to be ray traced because the fact that Clank is just like a full kind of metal body, it's a very good candidate to show off the ray tracing. And I feel like it, I mean, you would want to show it off if you had the power to actually do that. But anyway, I'm excited to take a look at the actual gameplay for Ratchet & Clank. The video that I'll be watching, I think, is from IGN. I couldn't really find exactly the best source to find this. I know that the full live stream did show a little bit of this, as well as some developers talking about that, but I thought that this was the best I could find as a 2-minute 14-second video. I have not watched it yet, so I don't really know what to expect, but I'm excited to dive in. Link in the description below. As always, let's take a look at the gameplay demo for Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. And where are my headphones? Okay, this just completely dives into it. I don't even know what's going on.
It's Ratchet and Clank.
I think what I'll do for this video is I'll have a more general just watch of it, just to kind of take it in and see what's going on, and then I'll kind of try and provide a little bit more commentary as to what I'm thinking. Okay, so before we dive into the next riff, we've already watched like half the trailer. I want to take a look, or the half of the gameplay demo, sorry. I want to have a look a little bit more closely at some of what I'm seeing here. So the scene itself is fairly standard. I'm not seeing anything here that is like, an overwhelming amount of detail or just something that wouldn't have been possible with last gen, because it's all fairly standard. Now, the things that I have noticed straight away, and of course this is kind of like a reaction as well as a review, so this is just basically just my initial thoughts and things that stick out to me the most. But one thing that I did notice was during this scene, the floor is reflecting quite a lot, and it's a little bit hard to see because I guess this is taken from the live stream, and you can see in this frame, for example, the quality is not very good. But there's this constant reflection going on here. Now, that makes me think that it is a ray traced reflection. It does look dynamic in a few of the scenes that I saw. So like, for example, I think over here when he rotates, there's like the screen is actually moving here, and you can actually see that. You can obviously see all of these characters here and the fact that they are in fact being reflected in the floor. The door as well, and the fact that the door is moving is kind of being reflected here. That's clearly a ray traced reflection. If you look back to these shots, the fact that we have a reflection here, technically speaking, it doesn't have to be ray traced. I'm sure it is in this case because they are using ray tracing. I'm just saying that this kind of reflection of the outside environment could easily just be a cube map that the shader is just looking up every time it needs to render something here. It's fairly standard and pretty easy to do that, especially with this level of blur, because blurring and blurry reflections are generally a lot more performance intensive to do than crystal clear sharp reflections. And then this is a really good example of the ray trace reflections where you see like this octopus or all of these kind of tentacles being reflected perfectly here.
Kraken, or at least a very large octopus.
It's also worth noting that the reflection resolution does seem quite high. I mean, it is blurry, but that's to be expected because this surface is a little bit rough and not really like a mirror at all, which to me always looks more impressive than if it was a crystal clear reflection. Okay, and then we're diving into another world here. A few people pointed out that they think that these worlds here are actually real life running kind of dynamic worlds and not just images. And I mean, I haven't seen anything yet that suggests that that's true. I just, like from a developer point of view, I just don't see the reason why you would have a real kind of, separate scenes actually running and being rendered just to render them on these pieces if this is all you're showing. It just seems very overkill. I'm almost 100% sure that this is just either a static texture or maybe it is some kind of like animation or baked kind of moving, changing texture, but I don't think that this is actually being rendered in real time. I just feel like that would be essentially a waste of resources. Not to mention that you would have to keep the data for all of these scenes kind of in memory so that you could actually do that, and it just doesn't seem like it's worth it.
I will never get used to that. Hey, break reality.
There's that kind of depth of field blur as well. I really like that. It looks pretty good. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of particles I'm seeing, like these smoke effects, just general glowing particles that are in the scene because why not? But in general, the only thing I really see here as being deterministically next gen is the whole kind of ray tracing usage, right? So ray traced reflections are probably the biggest thing I see. With the shadows, especially at this quality of this live stream, it's very difficult to see if they're using ray traced shadows or ray traced ambient occlusion, for example. I can't really tell because the resolution isn't really that high. There's a little bit of a warping effect here if I go back a few frames. There it is, that kind of warping effect. That's very cool as well. I'm a fan of that. Some water effects.
I kind of wish he was doing a worse job.
He might have more planned than
That's what I'm afraid of.
The grass looks quite nice, and it even looks like there's almost like a tilt shift effect here because the edges of this grass look blurry. And I'm not sure, I think that's just a particle, but it could be even chromatic aberration. So that might be simulating like some kind of real world camera effects, which I guess is cool. Not sure why people necessarily like adding imperfections all the time, but I guess it's just to make it seem more real. But anyway, so we have this kind of side blurriness here in general, and obviously that's not really due to the depth because they're on the same kind of depth plane as the rest of the grass here, but those effects are kind of cool. It's kind of just like a subtle post-process effect that just focuses your attention more on what's going on, which is very subtle and sometimes hard to actually see. But when you take a look at it, it's the reason why a lot of these games feel like you're really, like either it's immersive or that you actually understand what's going on specifically at your focal point, even though there's just so much stuff going on in the scene in general. That's cool. I mean, I don't know where he went to. I'm assuming that's not, yeah, this is just a little teleport. So many particles. I hate the fact that they've got a YouTube end screen right here. I mean, I guess that's IGN's fault, classic. Okay, and that's the gameplay trailer. That's like all of it. I'm gonna go over it a little bit more and see if there's anything else that I pick up and I want to say. Okay, so I've had a little bit more of a look at it, and basically this is what I have to say. I think that it looks great. It's very hard to tell certain really specific kind of finicky graphics things like whether or not the shadows are like ray traced and how smooth they are and how soft they are and how the ambient occlusion looks and all of that stuff because of the fact that it is live streamed and it looks a little bit blocky like you can see here. However, I think that the three biggest things here, or the few biggest things that actually separates this from what would probably have been achievable in last gen is probably just the effects. And I don't just mean effects as in the particles or things like that. I just mean generally, if you take the frame at its core and you look at it in terms of just the geometry and the textures, to me, like, it does look quite detailed, but because the aesthetic is more or less a bit simplistic deliberately, and it's not trying to be like, you know, really, really detailed texturing, that in itself doesn't stick out as something that wouldn't have been achievable with the previous generation. Because even if these textures might be like 2 times the resolution, it's not something that's going to be 100% apparent when you just look at the frame. I'm sure the frame itself is being rendered at a higher resolution just because they have the power to do that, but ultimately, if you get what I mean, it's not that big of a jump. The things that they've actually done that probably wouldn't have been achievable in the previous generation, at least to this extent, are all of the effects. So for example, the particle effects, they have a lot of particles. That's probably something that they're able to do that they would not just have had the opportunity to add in that many particles in the previous generation. Also, all the ray tracing effects that they're able to do. So for example, the ray trace reflections, they might be using ray trace shadows, although looking at Ratchet here, not really a good example, but that almost looks like just a normal like shadow map with some softness and some filtering going on. So they might not even be using ray trace shadows, but ray trace reflections they've confirmed they are using, so I can see that. Obviously those scenes with the reflections looked pretty good, and it was obvious that they weren't screen space reflections just because they were reflecting a large kind of amount of the actual environment that wouldn't have been possible if you're just using like older kind of reflection techniques that aren't as good. And then finally, the depth of field and the blurriness, like this kind of tilt shift blur effect, that stuff looks super high quality. If we look at like scenes like this where we have quite a nice blur, and yeah, this quality really isn't helping, but we have quite a nice blur that I saw in the previous video with the announcement trailer, and also kind of different tiers of blur, and it looks buttery smooth. And we've got the whole tilt shift effect. All of that stuff together requires quite a bit of processing power that probably wouldn't have been possible to do to this degree of quality with the previous generation. So particle effects, post-processing effects like all this depth of field and tilt shift effect and blurriness, and obviously ray tracing as well. That's the biggest thing that I see. In terms of them being able to have more objects on the screen or a slightly higher poly count or things like that, that's not as apparent as all of this stuff, in my opinion. Like this scene especially, look how many particles there are. It looks great. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this little reaction / review of the Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart gameplay demo. Let me know what your thoughts are about this game. Are you excited for it? Do you think this is a good kind of show off of the PlayStation 5's new technology? What things in this particular gameplay demo stick out to you as being impressive compared to the last generation? Because I must confess, even though I've been talking a lot about that, I haven't even seen Ratchet & Clank's previous generation game, so I'm not really sure. So my thoughts are basically based on what I know about the previous generation in general, not specifically the Ratchet & Clank games. What games are you most excited about in this next generation of consoles? Which do you think are the most impressive, and what do you want me to check out next? I know a few people have been suggesting that I take a look at the new Horizon game, and I'd love to do that, but I also wouldn't mind taking a look at some Xbox games because I know that a few people are beginning to think that I'm being paid by Sony, which is completely not true at all. I'm just looking at what I'm seeing and just giving my thoughts on it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to hit the like button if you did, because it really helps the channel out. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time. Have a great day. Goodbye.